The empire built on paper is starting to crack. And what you are watching right now in real time, is not just a financial story. It is not an economic headline tucked away on page 12 of your newspaper. What is unfolding before your eyes is a civilizational pivot, a tectonic rearrangement of the entire architecture of global power that was carefully constructed after World War II, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, barrel by barrel. And the country at the very center of this seismic shift is the one that was supposed to be America's most loyal partner in the entire Middle East, Saudi Arabia. The kingdom that shook hands with Henry Kissinger in 1974 and agreed to price every drop of oil in US dollars, feeding the American financial machine for 5 decades straight, is now sitting at the table with BRICS, trading in Chinese yuan, and quietly rewriting the rules of the global economy without asking Washington's permission. This is the story nobody in mainstream media wants to give you straight. So let's talk about it plainly. Let's talk about what is really happening, why it matters to every single American, and why the world your children will inherit looks nothing like the one you grew up in. Let's go back to 1974, because you can't understand the present without understanding the architecture of the past. The United States at that moment was in serious trouble. The dollar had been cut loose from gold in 1971 by Nixon. The economy was bleeding, inflation was savage, the Vietnam War had drained the treasury, and then came the 1973 Arab oil embargo, which sent shockwaves through every American gas station and every American kitchen. Washington needed a solution, and they needed it fast. So Henry Kissinger flew to Riyadh and engineered one of the most consequential secret financial arrangements in modern history. The deal was elegant in its simplicity and ruthless in its genius. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, America would provide military protection, weapons, and security guarantees to the House of Saud. Those petrodollar revenues were subsequently funneled into US treasuries and cemented the dollar as OPEC's trade currency. Every country on earth that needed oil, which was every country on earth, now needed dollars first. That single arrangement gave the United States something no empire in history had ever possessed before: the ability to print the currency the whole world was forced to use. It was the greatest financial privilege ever handed to a nation, and it lasted for 50 years. Now look at where we are today. On June 9th, 2024, Saudi Arabia announced its disassociation with the petrodollar deal. And whether or not a formal written treaty ever technically existed in the way some social media accounts described it, and yes, serious analysts have noted the formal legal document was murky, the functional reality is undeniable. In 2024, Saudi Arabia terminated this deal to diversify its economy and partnerships, including trade with China and its BRICS membership, signaling a shift toward a multipolar economic order. Saudi Arabia is now openly discussing oil transactions in Chinese yuan. It has joined the mBridge project alongside China, Hong Kong, the UAE, and Thailand, a platform that uses the digital yuan for cross-border payments, potentially allowing for oil transactions to be made outside the SWIFT network. Think about what that means. The plumbing of global finance, the pipes through which money flows, is being rewired, and the United States is watching it happen. Now let's talk about BRICS, because this is where the real story gets breathtaking in its scope. The 2025 BRICS Summit in Rio de Janeiro marked a transformative moment for the bloc, showcasing its expanded membership and ambitious agenda for reshaping global governance. The original 5 nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, were the founding architects of this alternative vision, but what has happened since is extraordinary. BRICS expanded from 5 to 11 full members in January 2024, adding Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia, and welcomed 10 partner countries in 2025, including Indonesia, Turkey, and Nigeria. 32 more nations are reportedly waiting in line to join. Let that number sit with you for a moment. 32 nations standing at the door of an institution specifically designed to offer an alternative to the Western-controlled financial order. This is not a fringe movement. This is not the ranting of a few angry governments on the margins of global power. BRICS Plus now accounts for nearly half of the world's population and around 40% of global GDP. And with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE inside the tent, BRICS now controls a huge share of global oil and gas reserves, meaning decisions made in Riyadh or Moscow can directly affect energy prices in Europe and America. You have to understand the strategic logic here, because it is not simply anti-Americanism, though Washington likes to frame it that way. The deeper driver is something far more rational and far more dangerous to the existing order. It is the use of sanctions as a weapon. When the United States froze Russia out of SWIFT after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, it sent a message to every government on earth that did not fully align with Washington's foreign policy. That message was, your access to the global financial system is conditional on your obedience. And nations that had been quietly watching for years suddenly started asking a very uncomfortable question. If America can do this to Russia, why can't they do it to us? Western economic policy has accelerated BRICS's push for financial alternatives, including Russia's removal from SWIFT after the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, trade tensions between China and the US, and the influence of Federal Reserve policies on global markets. The weaponization of the dollar did not protect American hegemony. It eroded the trust that made that hegemony possible in the first place. That is a strategic own goal of historic proportions. So what are they building as the alternative? This is where it gets technically fascinating. China's cross-border interbank payment system, known as CIPS, provides an alternative to SWIFT, facilitating yuan-based transactions independently of the Western-controlled network. As of January 2025, CIPS has 1,777 indirect participants across 119 countries, linking 4,800 banks in 185 countries. That is not a small operation. That is a parallel financial internet, and it is growing at a rate that should be alarming to anyone paying attention in Washington. Then there is the New Development Bank, the so-called BRICS Bank, which has accelerated over $32 billion across 96 projects since 2016, offering infrastructure financing to developing nations without the humiliating conditionality packages that the IMF attaches to its loans. No demands for austerity, no requirements to open your markets to Western corporations, no political litmus tests, just financing for roads, ports, power grids, and digital infrastructure. For the countries of the global south that have spent decades being lectured and conditioned by Washington and Brussels, this is not just attractive, it is transformative. And then there is BRICS Pay, the decentralized payment messaging system that allows member nations to transact in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely for intra-block trade. Now let's talk about the numbers, because Americans deserve to understand what the dollar's dominance actually means for their daily lives and what its erosion would feel like. For nearly a century, the US dollar has dominated global trade and finance, accounting for 59% of global foreign exchange reserves as of 2024. That reserve currency status is what allows the United States to run massive deficits year after year without triggering the kind of crisis that would destroy any other economy on Earth. It is what allows Washington to borrow cheaply, to fund its military globally, to impose sanctions as geopolitical leverage. The dollar's dominance is not just a financial statistic. It is the material foundation of American power. And a concerted move by BRICS nations to reduce reliance on the US dollar in international trade could diminish the dollar's global dominance, potentially leading to decreased demand for dollars and a weaker currency. A weaker dollar means higher import prices. It means more expensive oil, more expensive electronics, more expensive medicine. It means inflation that cannot be controlled by printing more money. The American middle class would feel this in its bones, and most Americans have no idea this process has already begun. Russia and China already conduct over 70% of their trade in non-dollar currencies. Brazil and China signed a one real trade settlement agreement. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. Saudi Arabia's entry into BRICS could further drive this shift, particularly in energy markets, where moving away from the petrodollar system could reshape global trade. These are not theoretical possibilities being debated in academic journals. These are live transactions happening right now, every single day, in a parallel financial architecture that is being constructed with remarkable speed and determination. The Chinese are patient builders. They think in decades, not electoral cycles. And they have used the time that American politicians spent arguing about tax cuts and Twitter to quietly build the infrastructure of a post-dollar world. And here is something that the commentators on cable news almost never discuss: the gold story. Because behind all of this currency maneuvering, there is a hard asset play happening that is equally staggering. In 2023 and 2024, central banks purchased a combined 2,082 tons of gold, the fastest accumulation pace since World War I. The previous average from 2010 to 2021 was just 473 tons annually. Russia, China, India, Turkey, Poland, all of them are systematically reducing dollar holdings and accumulating physical gold. This is not panic buying. This is strategic repositioning. When the moment comes, if it comes, When a new settlement currency is needed, the nations with the most gold will be in the strongest negotiating position. The BRICS nations understand this. They are not just building alternative payment systems. They are hedging against a future in which the dollar's exorbitant privilege is no longer exorbitant. Now let's talk about Donald Trump's response to all of this, because it is instructive in a deeply revealing way. When confronted with the BRICS de-dollarization agenda, Trump's instinct was to reach for the tariff weapon. Trump warned that any BRICS state that even mentions the destruction of the dollar would be charged a 150% tariff, and claimed that BRICS states had broken up as a result. But look at the reality on the ground. BRICS did not break up. Two ASEAN nations, Thailand and Malaysia, joined BRICS as member states in January 2025, and Indonesia joined as a full member, becoming the first ASEAN nation to do so. Brazil, which assumed the presidency of BRICS in 2025, invited Mexico, Uruguay, and Colombia to participate in the next BRICS summit in July 2025. The bloc is not retreating under American pressure, it is expanding. The threat of tariffs may deter individual nations from moving too fast, but it cannot stop the structural logic driving this entire process. If anything, the aggression in Washington's posture is accelerating the very thing it claims to oppose. Every time America weaponizes trade, it confirms for hesitant nations that building alternatives to Western control is not ideological. It is a matter of survival. Saudi Arabia's strategic realignment is not merely economic. It also reflects a broader vision of national reinvention underpinned by Vision 2030, where innovation, digital infrastructure, and non-oil sectors are key to long-term sustainability. The Saudis are not simply pivoting toward China because they hate America. They are pivoting because they have a young population, a post-oil future to build, and a clear-eyed understanding that the 21st century's center of gravity is in Asia, not the Atlantic. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement, brokered by China in March 2023, after 7 years of severed ties, marks a significant shift in the regional landscape and underscores Saudi Arabia's strategic pivot towards stability and pragmatic diplomacy. China accomplished in one diplomatic moment what Washington had failed to achieve for years. It brought two of the Middle East's fiercest rivals to the same table and got them talking. That is soft power of a different order entirely. And the Saudis noticed. Saudi Arabia's willingness to join the BRICS club of emerging nations and partner with China and other countries in the mBridge project to explore the use of central bank digital currencies for cross-border payments should not be surprising. This is the story of a kingdom that for 50 years was the anchor of American financial hegemony, slowly, methodically opening its options. It is not a betrayal in any simple sense. It is a rational calculation being made by a government that watches Washington's political dysfunction, its lurching foreign policy, its inability to honor long-term commitments, and decides, quietly, without fanfare, that it is time to have more than one dance partner. What does all of this mean for the average American sitting at home right now? It means that the world your grandparents understood, the world where the dollar was king, where American power was unchallengeable, where the institutions of Bretton Woods set the terms for everyone. That world is over, not tomorrow, not next year, but the direction of travel is unmistakable. If history offers any lessons, it is that no currency remains dominant forever. The British pound, once the world's reserve currency, lost its status to the US dollar in the mid-20th century. By 1980, the pound had declined to just 2% of global reserves, illustrating that currency power follows economic dominance. The United States is not facing that kind of collapse imminently, but the trajectory, the slow structural erosion of dollar primacy as more and more of the world's trade bypasses the greenback, is now underway and accelerating. De-dollarization remains the defining ambition of BRICS. The mBridge cross-border payment system and local currency trade deals are advancing, but a unified BRICS currency remains unlikely in the near term. And this is the nuance that matters. The goal for China and for most BRICS members is not to replace the dollar with a single new currency. The goal is dollar independence, alternatives that reduce vulnerability to US sanctions. And that independence is happening through bilateral arrangements: China-Saudi, China-Russia, China-Iran. These are not replacing the global oil market. They are creating parallel channels outside of it. A fragmented, multipolar financial world where no single currency is dominant, that is the destination. And in some ways, that world is actually more dangerous for American power than a simple replacement would be, because it is far harder to fight a diffuse network than a single rival. The question Americans need to be asking, and the question your politicians are studiously avoiding, is this: what does the United States bring to this table in the 21st century beyond military force and financial coercion? Because the nations of the global South have learned something important. They have learned that American security guarantees are conditional. They have learned that access to the dollar system can be revoked without warning. They have learned that the IMF's money comes with political strings attached. And they have learned that China will build your port, fund your railway, and broker your regional peace deal without demanding that you align your foreign policy with Washington first. That is an offer that is very hard to compete with, and America has not yet figured out how to compete with it. BRICS isn't anti-West, it's pro-multipolar. The goal is a balanced system where no single power dominates global trade, finance, or diplomacy. That framing is important because it makes BRICS a much harder target politically than a simple anti-American bloc would be. Countries like India, which are full BRICS members, simultaneously maintain deep strategic and economic ties with the United States. Saudi Arabia, even as it diversifies, still sells the vast majority of its oil in dollars and holds enormous quantities of US treasuries. This is not a clean break. It is a slow drift, a rebalancing, and slow drifts are the ones that are hardest to reverse because they accumulate over years and decades before their full weight becomes visible. By the time the political class in Washington truly grasps what has happened, the architecture will already be in place and the window for reshaping it will have closed. The empire built on paper is starting to crack, not with a bang, but with 1,000 quiet transactions happening in yuan and rubles and rupees in ports and markets and digital ledgers all across the global South. The question is not whether the world is changing, it already has. The question is whether the United States has the wisdom, the creativity, and the strategic vision to adapt to a world it no longer controls, or whether it will keep reaching for tariffs and sanctions and military deployments while the ground beneath the dollar shifts quietly and irrevocably beneath its feet. That answer will define the next 50 years of American life, and it is a conversation that this country desperately needs to have, starting right now.